Hello, my name is Emily Ace, and this is my podcast on World War I, World War II, and Cold War weaponry. The following topic is World War I weaponry, covered by Ryoka.
Some British rifles used in World War I were the Winchester Model 1907, a blowback-operated semi-automatic rifle which was created by the Winchester Repeating Arms Company in the beginning of 1906. This model was extremely popular among the officers in the 1930s. Another rifle they used was the Ariska Type 38. Even though this was a Japanese rifle, most of them were brought from Japan and used by the British during the First World War. One of the many machine guns used by the British were the Vickers machine gun. This machine gun was produced by the Vickers Limited Company and was originally produced for the British Army. As for the US, they used rifles like the Springfield M1903, which is a 5-round magazine-fed bolt-action service-repeating rifle, and was used mostly during the beginning of the 20th century, as well as the Browning M1918 rifle. This rifle was designed in 1917 by John Browning for the American Expeditionary Force in Europe. For the German Empire, they used the Mauser M1887. This rifle was the first rifle created by the Mauser brothers and was adopted by the German Empire as the Gewehr 71. Finally, for the Kingdom of Italy, they used the Carcano M1891. This was a bolt-action, magazine-fed, repeating military rifle and carabine. This gun was created and introduced in 1891 by the Salvador Carcano.
The following topic is World War II weaponry, covered by Alex.
A semi-auto rifle, which is strange because most other countries use a bolt action. Only about 2 other countries other than the US try to use a semi-auto as their main battle rifle. These 2 being France and the USSR. France with the MAS-44 and the Soviets with the SVT. However, both these places were invaded while they were beginning to start the transition and weren't able to fully implement it until really after the war. The Soviets got pretty close. One major myth about the M1 Garand, though, is that after you fire the 8 rounds, it has a very distinctive ping. This ping is very loud, and it was a very common myth at the time, and nowadays that you hear a lot, is that when enemy soldiers would hear this ping, they'd charge knowing that the enemy had no ammo. This is a myth. It was actually disproven in the 1950s by the United States Army, and that's just one major myth I always like to break up when I hear the M1 Garand mentioned. United Kingdom, they use the SMLE. It's been around the British Army pretty much since the early 1900s in many different variations. Obviously, this is not the same one they used in World War I. This is the SMLE Mark IV, or just known as the Lee Enfield, but really, they use a lot of them. So Lee Enfield, I believe, Mark III, actually. Number 1, Mark III. Lee Enfield, number 4, Mark I. Really same thing as the SMLE. It was a very smooth action. It was very fast. One of the major reasons they didn't switch to semi-auto, besides being a very stuck in the past or traditionally as the British Army was, like tactically, was because their gun, the SMLE, was very fast. So it had a very smooth action. They adopted pretty much semi-autos. Next country, France, used the Lebel rifle. That was their kind of main rifle. And they were planning on switching that to the MAS, but plans didn't happen. They got invaded. Lebel rifle, not much to talk about. It was very old. It wasn't the best rifle, but it got them through it. Very strong. Germany used the Kar 98K. They also experimented with semi-autos, but they weren't as in full force as many other countries, and the semi-autos they used weren't the greatest. But back to the bolt action, their main battle rifle, Kar 98K, sort of it's a carabiner, it's a carbine. It means it's shortened, it's lighter than the other ones. So they're pretty much a World War I counterpart. There wasn't much changed. It doesn't kick as much for being 8mm Mauser as you might think. It has a very nice bolt, and in fact, the Mauser bolt is what inspired a lot of other, most modern bolts. They don't, that's pretty much what it is. If you fire almost any other, bolt, you'll probably at one point have used the Mauser bolt. In fact, the weapon we used in World War I as the US, the M1903 Springfield, that used a very similar action to the Mauser bolt, and was practically a Mauser. It was based off the Spanish Mauser. That's besides the point. That's going to World War I. Next country. Alright, so Italy. Italy used a Carcano, kind of a strange weapon. It wasn't the greatest. There was 2. There's a Carcano carbine, which is a very interesting. Otherwise, it had a very interesting bolt. There's much to talk about it. Didn't do much. It was disliked generally. It wasn't the greatest. It was better than what they had, but otherwise, it was just a bit weird. Wasn't the greatest. No one really mentions it. The Italians had a great submachine gun though, which is the Beretta 1938. It was overall just The Italians had very poor industry, very poor fury going in the war, and they didn't experiment with semi-autos almost at all. It's very different than the much more innovative Italian army of World War One. They usually use a variant of the Mauser. They usually use a variant of that. Otherwise, there's nothing. They had a few interesting submachine guns, but onto the Soviets. They use the Mosin Nagant 38 carbine. They also use their older World War One variant, the M1991. That's much older, heavier, very long. Otherwise, it was a pretty good weapon. It was very sturdy, I guess. It's kind of regarded as a good weapon. It wasn't as good as maybe say people think of the British or the German, but it was a good one. And as I said earlier, the Soviets experimented a lot with automatic, semi-automatic guns. Also you saw early versions of the SKS, but that isn't much. They also experimented with almost like assault rifles, but they weren't really.
The following topic is Soviet Union Cold War weaponry, covered by Melissa.
Soviet Union Cold War weaponry. In the nuclear weapons category, they had the RDS-2, which was the second atomic bomb developed by the Soviet Union and was tested on September 24, 1951. And the RDS-3, or the RDS-3T, a more modern version of the RDS-3, was the third atomic bomb formed by the Soviet Union in 1951. As for the rifles, they had the AK-47, which is a gas-operated assault rifle developed in the Soviet Union by Mikhail Kalashnikov. The APS, an underwater rifle that was designed by the Soviet Union in early 1970. And the TKB-517, which features were similar to the AK-47, but was proved more reliable and more accurate while firing.
The following topic is Cold War weaponry from Britain and the U.S., covered by Emily. Great Britain Cold War weaponry. Some guns Great Britain used during the Cold War were the Browning High Power, a single-action semi-automatic handgun that was available in 9mm and .40 S&W calibers, and was designed by firearms inventor John Browning. The 4.5-inch Mark 8, a British naval gun which was created in 1972 and is also used today, and the L2 Bat, which was a 120mm caliber anti-tank rifle. This was only used during the Vietnam War. Some miscellaneous weapons were mines such as Mk7 and L10 Ranger anti-personnel mine, both used till about early 2000s, and nuclear weapons such as the Redbeard, which was the first British tactical nuclear weapon, and the Violet Club. Some of the weaponry used in the United States during the Cold War was the M2 Browning heavy machine gun, the Barrett M82, a recoil-operated semi-automatic anti-material precision rifle, the M73 machine gun designed to be used on tanks, and the Barrett M9, a semi-automatic pistol that was also mentioned being used by the British.